I am your host, T3 Raider Facts. The Oakland Raiders felt as if they had unfinished business in 1968. They had lost only 2 games, finishing at 12-2, had stormed their rivals, the Kansas City Chiefs, in the divisional playoff, and then had come up just 12 yards short against the Jets, a game that could have propelled them into their second straight Super Bowl, and perhaps Al Davis would have been the one holding up the trophy, proclaiming the AFL as more than just equals, but as superiors. But none of that was to be. 1969 marked the last year of separate AFL and NFL pieces to the professional football puzzle, but there was still enmity between the two leagues. Most of the team from the previous year remained intact, but as two-time repeating Western Division champions and having appeared in 2 straight league championship games, the Raiders were now the hunted rather than the hunter. A couple of new additions would add to the team's excellence, including a new head coach. Once again, welcome in. I am your host, T3 Raider Facts. I want to welcome you to another edition of the T3 Raider Roots podcast, this time taking a look back at the year 1969. After the Raiders lost to the Jets and John Roush left Oakland for a coaching position in Buffalo, after enduring Al Davis for 3 seasons as the head man, the top candidates to replace Roush were assistants John Madden and Ollie Spencer. The man Davis really wanted was one of his former colleagues, Chuck Noll. But Noll, who had moved on from San Diego and was the defensive coordinator for Don Shula in Baltimore, fresh off a Super Bowl appearance, had agreed to take the top job in Pittsburgh. Davis was familiar with John Madden going back a few years. Al was once on a scouting trip to San Diego and visited the San Diego State campus to look over quarterback Don Horn, who later went on to become a number 1 draft pick for the Green Bay Packers. As Davis was coming into the school office, he noticed a big man lumbering in wearing high-top football shoes, baseball pants, wearing a cap, with a whistle dangling from his neck. The man introduced himself as John Madden, and they talked a little football. Madden even reminded Davis that the two of them had communicated by phone when he, Madden, was at Hancock Junior College. Davis had filed this information away for future use. When Davis left his coaching position with the Raiders in 1966 to assume his brief role as AFL commissioner, Davis had brought in a coach named Bill Walsh to handle the running backs. But after just 1 season, Walsh proved that he was not up to the task and he needed to be replaced. Madden was brought in, but not to coach the running backs. That position was given to another John Polanchek of Michigan State. Madden was assigned to the linebackers. But Davis also noticed that Madden was very interested in recruiting and knew all the players around the country. Perhaps some of these traits reminded Davis of the path he had blazed not too many years earlier. The Raiders knew Madden as Pinky. He lumbered like an elephant, he had red hair, and his pulpy, pale salmon-colored face and neck would seem to light up almost neon red whenever he became agitated. Once he left the field, however, his whole persona changed into an easy, fun-loving, conversational demeanor. Because of this and his educational background, Al Davis believed that these traits would enable Madden to really get to know his players. In fact, to a man, everyone on the team liked him and also learned from him. Even so, Madden put a good deal of work into his craft, and his easy ways were infectious. Madden grew up in Dale City, near Oakland. He was a guard at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo and was drafted by the Philadelphia Eagles in 1959. But in his first pro camp, he tore up his knee. Out for the year, the young player would take his whirlpool treatments in the morning at Franklin Field, then wander into the room where Eagles coach Norm Van Brocklin would be studying game film. He studied and he learned. When it became obvious that his playing days were over, Madden went back to Cal Poly and earned a master's degree in education. He began teaching at San Luis Obispo High School. When the football coach there was fired, Madden took over as coach. From there, he moved into a position as line coach at Hancock Junior College in Santa Maria. At a coach's clinic, he met a coach by the name of Don Coryell, who hired Madden as the defensive coordinator for his San Diego State team in 1964. As he continued to teach, Madden always noted that an important root of his coaching style was his knowledge of the group dynamics of infants. He once said that as a coach, the class that helped him the most was child psychology. He learned that as a group, football players reacted like children. Translating these lessons to adults, Madden let them act like children while learning to take ultimate control of their subjection, which was, in a more structured sense, right out of the Al Davis playbook. Comfortable that he had the right man on the sidelines, Al then decided to consolidate the duties of business, marketing, and public relations into one job. For that, he turned to another Al Locasal. Locasal had already built a reputation as a good scout who could seal the deal with players and then have the ability to retain them. He was so good, in fact, that the legendary Paul Brown had made him the Bengals' first key hire when the franchise joined the AFL in 1968. Within 3 years, thanks largely to Al's efforts, the Bengals would win their division. With strong attachment to Al Davis, Locasal was wooed by Davis to join the Raiders after just 1 year in Cincinnati. So the Raiders now had Big Al, Davis, and Little Al, Locasal. As masterful as he was in his job, an interesting dynamic was being created. Since Big Al was suspicious of almost everything, Little Al became the vocal mouthpiece of Davis and conducted business in an almost tyrannical manner. Locasal became the fall guy, someone to yell at secretaries, office workers, and reporters. Sports Illustrated's Ron Fimwright noted that Little Al was, quote, very good at putting into words what Al Davis would have said if Al Davis would have chosen to say it, unquote. With Little Al doing most of Big Al's dirty work, Davis could concentrate on football and grow into more of an ownership role. Meanwhile, the Raiders' new head coach was growing very comfortable with the new hierarchy. It was simple, Madden said. Al ran the club. I ran the team. Ron Wolf ran the scouting. Al Locasal ran the office. I didn't even have a secretary. I used Al's. That's how simple it was for me to work with Al. Not for Al, with Al. One thing Madden did understand is that Al Davis didn't have the visible tools to show people his feelings. And yet the head coach was forever fascinated with the incredible, if slightly twisted, obsession that drove all of Al's impulses. Madden commented how much Davis knew about football, the rules, the ticket situation, the radio contracts, all the advertising, all the marketing. He knew it all. Madden also explained that Davis had a mood for each one, that he would create his own moods, a mood for drafting, a mood for trading, a mood for negotiating. One mood just kicks right into another, Madden said. You can simplify a simple person. You can't simplify Al Davis. But Al Davis's bottom line was indeed very simple. Each of the past 2 seasons, they had lost in the playoffs to the eventual Super Bowl champions. And Al still believed that his Raiders should have been the rightful owners of the most recent Super Bowl trophy instead of the Jets. He longed for that title. In 1969 was the year he aimed to deliver that for the team and for the city, not to mention for the sake of his own reputation of being a football genius. The previous squad from 1968 was strong. In fact, the 1969 draft rendered key depth at several positions, but produced no starters right away. Key players like Art Toms, George Bueller, Marv Hubbard would all move into prominent roles in time. But for now, Al Davis was adding quality depth and rolling with the team that was amassing wins at an unequal pace. They just needed to find a way to get over the hump at the end. With a new coach and a title to defend, the Raiders opened the 1969 campaign at home against the Houston Oilers. On a pair of nearly identical 5-yard touchdown plunges by running back Charlie Smith, Oakland staked its way to a 14-0 lead at halftime. But the Oilers made adjustments and came storming back. Houston scored 17 unanswered points in the second half to go up by a score of 17-14. But a 64-yard scoring pass from LaMonica to Warren Wells late in the contest helped the Raiders overcome 3 interceptions in the game, and they ended up with a 21-17 victory. Week 2 was another home game, a Saturday night affair against the Miami Dolphins led by Bob Greasy and rookie running back Jim Kick out of Wyoming. Dave Grayson for the Raiders intercepted a bobbled pass and returned it 76 yards to open the scoring. The Raiders then extended the lead before the Dolphins came back to tie the contest at 17, mostly on the strength of Kick, who ended up leading the AFL in 1969 with 9 rushing touchdowns, 2 of which came during this game. A critical Warren Wells reception late in the game set the Raiders up for a 46-yard field goal, courtesy of the 42-year-old right leg of George Blanda. The Raiders won 20-17 and were now 2-0. In week 3 in Boston, it took Daryle Lamonica and the Raiders a while to get warmed up. Quarterback Mike Tolliver led the Patriots offense to 2 consecutive scores, and suddenly the team that had lost only 3 games in 2 years found itself in a 13-0 hole. After Boston botched the extra point, the Raiders finally were warmed up and they went to work. Lamonica hit Wells on a 28-yard touchdown pass. Then, after a George Blanda field goal, Lamonica hit on 3 more scoring strikes, 1 to Fred Biletnikoff, 1 to Warren Wells, and 1 to running back Hewitt Dixon. Larry Todd added a 1-yard touchdown run, and before they knew it, the Patriots went from being up 13-0 to down 38-13. 10 points late by the Patriots served as little more than an afterthought. The Raiders went to 3-0. In the Week 4 return matchup against Miami, this time in the Orange Bowl, the undefeated Raiders faced the winless Dolphins. In the previous meeting, just 2 weeks earlier, a Saturday night crowd had watched Oakland pull out a victory with a late field goal. Now the tables were turned as Bob Greasy led his team down the field on a furious final drive that resulted in a tying field goal in another Saturday night nail-biter. The 20-20 tie represented one of only 2 blemishes on the Raider record during the 1969 regular season. In Denver, in Week 5, there was snow, mud, and sawdust all over the field. There was also a blocked Denver punt that resulted in quick points for the visitors. On a cold day and on a sloppy field, 2 Bronco turnovers turned out to be critical. The Raiders picked up a late touchdown to win, going away by 10. In Week 6, the Oakland crowd warmly welcomed back former head coach John Roush, who was now the head man in Buffalo. As hospitable as the crowd may have seemed before the game started, the Raiders proved to be anything but gracious hosts. Roush's homecoming soon turned into his own personal nightmare, as Lamonica led the Silver and Black to a 50-point scoring barrage. Buffalo fumbled the ball away 7 times and also gave up 2 interceptions. The Raiders made sure that none of those opportunities was wasted. The halftime score was 42-0, and Lamonica had already thrown 7 touchdown passes. The Bills played much tougher defense in the second half and put up 2 touchdowns of their own, but it was little consolation. The Raiders moved their record to 5-0-1 with a dominating victory. After cruising to a win in San Diego, the Raiders were beaten for the first and only time during the regular season, losing on the road to the Bengals, 31-17. They then came back home and shook off the dust, beating their Western Division rivals, the Denver Broncos, soundly by a score of 41-10. Despite a record of 7-1-1, the Raiders found themselves in second place in their own division, a half game behind the rival Chiefs. The Raiders next welcome in an old and familiar rival, the San Diego Chargers. Their coach and Al Davis's old boss, Sid Gilman, had to step down from coaching for health reasons, and making his coaching debut was new man Charlie Waller. Waller and Madden staged a classic back-and-forth struggle, with the home team coming out on top, 20-16. With the win, it was now on to Kansas City. Hoping to avenge a 41-6 loss from a playoff game the year before, Kansas City staked its way to a 14-3 lead. But then the wheels came off. The Chiefs turned the ball over a total of 7 times, including 2 interceptions returned for touchdowns, as the Raiders stole the game 27-24. With just 3 games left to play, the Raiders faced the Jets, with whom they had payback on their minds for the previous year's AFL Championship defeat, then the Bengals, who had dealt them the year's only defeat, and then ending the season at home against arch-rival Kansas City. First, the Jets. The New York crowd witnessed a stumbling and unimpressive effort by the defending world champions, and the Raiders' offense marched up and down the field. Although it had trouble scoring touchdowns late, the Raiders eased to a 27-14 victory. Surely Oakland was thinking, what if, as it left the field? But with another victory, they were continuing on their quest to win that elusive Super Bowl trophy. Back home in the California sun, Oakland got its revenge over the Cincinnati Bengals, 37-17. The contest was never in doubt. LaMonica and Blanda each threw for touchdowns, and the Raider ground game rolled up over 300 rushing yards. Now, the last game of the season would pit them against their hated division rivals. Receiver Warren Wells suffered a separated shoulder during the contest, which put him on the shelf for a while. It was a tough defensive battle, a game where two teams truly waged war on one another. A 10-6 victory gave first-year head coach John Madden a 12-1-1 record, the best in the AFL, and the second-best record in franchise history. It was now on to the playoffs and their date with destiny. On December 21st, 1969, the Houston Oilers rolled into Oakland on a rainy, sloppy day. Sporting a losing record, Houston was the beneficiary of one of two wild card spots that were added in the last AFL season. The Oilers may not have been looking forward to a return trip to Oakland, as many of them remembered the pasting they had received at the hands of the Raiders in the AFL Championship just 2 years prior. But this was a new year, and they still had a chance, albeit slim, to make it to a Super Bowl. Harsh reality then set in very quickly. Oakland scored 4 touchdowns on 3 Daryle Lamonica passes, 2 to Biletnikoff, and a 57-yard interception return for touchdown by George Atkinson. Rod Sherman, filling in for the injured Warren Wells, caught his second touchdown pass in the second quarter, and the Raiders went into the locker room at halftime with a 35-0 lead. The issue was never in doubt. By the time Daryle Lamonica had left the field for the final time that day, the Raiders had put up 8 touchdowns, 7 on offense, and the Raiders prepared to host the Kansas City Chiefs in what was supposed to be their own personal coronation as the final AFL champions before the merger with the NFL was complete. Hank Stram's Chiefs came into the game knowing 2 things. First, they knew that both regular season meetings between the 2 teams were close games. In fact, only 7 points separated the 2 teams in those 2 contests. The Raiders had won on the road by 3 and at home by 4 just 2 weeks earlier. The thing the Chiefs knew is that it's very difficult to defeat a division rival 3 times in a single season. The Chiefs' offense tested the Raiders' pass defense early, largely on the strength of the Len Dawson to Otis Taylor connection. They were able to move the ball a little in the early stages, but were unproductive through most of the first half. With the basic attack that featured the running and pass receiving of Charlie Smith, the Raiders put themselves in position for 2 early scores. On their first scoring opportunity, a 52-yard field goal attempt by George Blanda fell just short. Then, after getting the ball back, the Raiders drove all the way down the field, and Smith burst over the left side for the drive-capping touchdown. At this point, it looked like the Raiders were well on their way to a Super Bowl, a trip to New Orleans. But after their initial score, the Raiders ran into a wall that was the stout Kansas City defense. 7 more times in the first half they got the ball, and all 7 times they couldn't do anything with it. Meanwhile, the Chiefs were trying to solve the Raiders' defense. With only 3 minutes left in the first half, they moved into Oakland territory for the first time all day. Using Otis Taylor as a decoy, Dawson threw a long strike to wide out Frank Pitts, which set Kansas City up at the 1-yard line. From there, Wendell Hayes punched it in, and the game was tied as the half ended. On a George Blanda field goal attempt proved costly. But Kansas City fumbled the ball right back, and Oakland was right back in business. Chiefs defensive back Johnny Robinson was injured when he got hooked up on the sidelines with an officiating crew in a play that mysteriously resulted in his injury and momentum. LaMonica tried to exploit Robinson's absence on the next play with a pass that fell incomplete. But on the play, LaMonica had jammed the fingers of his passing hand against the face mask of hard-charging defensive lineman Aaron Brown. Momentum gone. So the ageless wonder George Blanda came in to replace LaMonica. Blanda, the same man who had led Houston to 2 consecutive AFL championships at the beginning of the 1960s, was now stepping in to help write the AFL's final chapter. When he came in, he missed on a pass. Then he missed on a field goal. It was just another in a series of missed opportunities on the day. When he got the ball back, Blanda proceeded to march his team down for the tie-breaking score. He sent Warren Wells deep, but his long pass was intercepted when Wells slipped while trying to make a cut toward the end zone. The Chiefs were now penned back at their own 6-yard line. On a critical third down play, Dawson launched a long pass for Otis Taylor down the right sideline. Taylor made a spectacular catch, although some of the replays indicated he might not have gotten both feet in bounds when he made the catch. However, awarded with the game, Kansas City's offense gained new life, and on the power of Robert Holmes running and a key pass interference penalty, the Chiefs ended the third quarter by pushing into the end zone for the go-ahead score. After a long missed field goal by Kansas City, the Raiders got the ball back with 14 minutes left in the game. LaMonica came back into the game to steer the offense. He moved the ball down the field, but then threw an interception. Kansas City got the ball back, but a couple plays later on a boxed handoff, the Raiders recovered a fumble and were in business again. From the 24-yard line of Kansas City, LaMonica then threw another interception. Then, with 7.5 minutes left in the quarter, the Chiefs fumbled the ball back to the Raiders. Then LaMonica threw a pass to Warren Wells. Defensive back Emmett Thomas undercut the route, intercepted the pass, and returned it 62 yards, flipping the field and putting Kansas City in a position to up their lead, which they did on a Jan Stenerud field goal. With only 2 minutes remaining and hope fading, the Raiders received one last gift when the Chiefs fumbled the ball again deep in their own territory. Down by 10 points, the Raiders needed to score right away. From the 13-yard line, 3 incomplete passes, and then a fourth down sack of LaMonica sealed the deal. The final score was 17-7. Kansas City coach Hank Stram said later, "I told them to turn it on. Give it all you've got." They did. And we beat one of the greatest teams in pro football, maybe the greatest. So there would be no trip to New Orleans, no trip to the Super Bowl. For 2 consecutive years, the Raiders have been turned away at the door that marked entry into the Super Bowl, having appeared there just 2 years previous. Just a handful of plays and misfortune turned what might have been a dynasty into simply dying on the field. Now that the 60s were giving way to the 70s, the Raiders would try to shake off this long hangover and break through the glass to find that elusive glass slipper. Next time, we'll look at the year 1970, John Madden's second year at the helm, and the first year of a unified NFL. For this episode, I would like to primarily thank Murray Olderman, Ken Rappaport, Mike Grabowski, Michael McCambridge, and NFL Films. Make sure to visit my YouTube channel, T3 Sports Guy, and subscribe so you can catch up on all the Raiders history year by year. You can also check me out on the Only Nation podcast with Heidi and Raider Homer as we continue to follow the silver and black. Until next time, thank you for joining me, and I want to remind you that passion always outlives fashion. And here's wishing you a bright silver moon shining in the dark black night. Stay safe and take care, and go Raiders.